Yeah, well, it's like, I got here in that first 3 months and I failed. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get anything. I had this idea that I'd get a job on Wall Street as a junior, whatever. I didn't care. And then at night I'd go to acting classes or something and try to get something going in that way. And I came here and got on the piss and attempted to chase around Swedish backpackers at a hostel and tried my hardest and I'm like, this place is amazing, and I failed, and then I ran out of money and I moved to London, which was great. So I did 3 years in London, and that's where I got the job in a bank, and I saved my money and did back office stuff there in banks. Living on the old Kent Road, lived in Seven Sisters, and Seven Sisters was great. I'd get on the way to work. I'd see the same ladies every morning, the women of the night who were coming home. Morning, darling. Morning, you develop a nice rapport when you walk past each other every morning. They're finishing their night shift. These lovely ladies, poor darlings, and they're going home, and I'm getting on the train in a crappy suit I got for my 21st birthday, going into the city of London for a job. But I loved those 3 years in London, and then I ended up back in Bondi in the year 2000. And when I say back in Bondi, back to Australia, but I said I'm going to go and live in Bondi, and it was kind of like living in a mini London. Bondi was full of Brits and the excitement, but I wanted to be back in Australia for that Olympic year. It was the Sydney Olympics, and I wanted to be a part of my country putting on a world show, and I was kind of proud Aussie that we're going to show the world what was going on. And so I moved there, and I was trying my hand at writing, trying to write a sitcom, trying to write TV. I had some cash sort of saved, but again, failing miserably. And I'm like, what the hell have I done? I had a really good, easy life, in terms of making good money, living in London, good friends, things. It's one of those towns, as you know, in London, if you have a bit of cash, you can afford to take a taxi home as opposed to taking, a 2 a.m. Tube home, which is madness. So, and London's a real geography game. If you live in the town where your mates are, you can have a really good time. But if you're out in Seven Sisters on your own, it can be quite lonely at times. You know what I mean? So, things were starting to go well in London for me, and I'm like, what have I done? I've just come here, I'm blowing my life savings, I'm trying to be a writer. No one's hiring any jobs. I'm like rock bottom. I think I had some money in the stock market then. If you remember, the dot-com crash blew up in the early O's. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with myself? And and I said, but I got to hold tight here. The Olympics are on in 4 months, and I'd had a wedding planned to New York City in August of 2000, and that wedding was my best mate getting married in New York. So I'd prepaid that whole trip, so I couldn't screw that trip up. I was going there, I was going to go be a part of the wedding and get on the piss with my mates for a couple of weeks back in New York, the city that I'd lived in previously for 3 months. I thought I knew it all there. But I said, I've got to make it in entertainment somehow, because when the Olympics are over, I'm back to being an accountant somewhere, whoever will take me. So I get to New York, and I'm here on the piss every night. The wedding happens, great. And I have a few days up my sleeve, and I'd made a demo tape, which I'd never made before, for a mate of mine in Bondi. And my idea was to be someone's Sydney Olympics correspondent. How do I just be the phone call guy, because I knew TV's not going to take me. That's NBC. They have the rights to the Olympics. But someone in New York City, a radio station, will take a call from me during the Sydney Games. That was my idea, to be a Sydney Olympics correspondent. And I'm in my head, I'm like, I'll do sports, I'll do gossip, I'll do whatever this radio show, whatever one hires me, will take. So I get 20 radio stations. I'm sitting there on a hot summer's morning at a mate's place, August 2000, and I have a list from the old internet, and I just start calling the list. The first the first radio show or station I call is, and I don't know anything. I got no idea. I'm an accountant. I used to be an accountant at this stage in Lewisham. You know what I mean? That was my life. Yeah. So here I am, from an accountant in Lewisham to sitting there calling radio stations, cold calling. So I call the first station. It's Howard Stern's radio station. He's the biggest star in world radio at the time. I call him, and the receptionist just hangs up on me. And I call another, next one on the list, bang, KTU, another New York station, hang up on me. Every receptionist hangs up on me. And this is kind of peak radio, when crazy people are calling radio stations all the time. And the stuff we grew up on loving, radio and crazy listeners and whatever, everyone's hanging up on me. I get to pretty much the last call. I call this one last call, and I beg the woman. I said, just put me through to someone. Just someone on your. And I was calling it breakfast. Anyone. Cleaner, mate. I would have pitched the cleaner, exactly, mate. And I said, I have this idea for the Sydney Olympics. I'm Aussie. I'm in New York. I want to meet someone from your. I call it breakfast show, which in America. They don't call them breakfast shows. In Australia, we call them breakfast shows. I'm not sure what they call them same, I think, in London. Breakfast show, yeah. But in New York, it's a morning show. So I'm like, shit, no, I screwed that up. But eventually she puts me through to someone, and it's a voicemail. But the greeting on the voicemail was Steve Irwin. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. And so I went, here we go. And I just left the most colloquial Australian bushwhacking message ever. And g'day mate, I'm Brad here. I'm from Bondi. I'm here to talk about koalas, kangaroos, all that bullshit. Anyway, I hung the phone up and I said, well, that's it. I'm going back to Australia to figure out the rest of my life. I've had a good time here in New York, whatever, and I got a call straight back on the same phone I hung up on, landline, and the guy was pretty gruff, and he said, you have an idea? I said, yeah. He goes, come and pitch me tomorrow morning. I walk into that radio station the following morning. I'm dripping in sweat because I'd walked there, and I go to this guy's office, and it's the executive producer of the morning show, and he's very angry with me. He goes, what's your idea? I said, I want to be a Sydney Olympics correspondent. I want to call in every day from the Olympics. And he goes, all right, do you have a demo tape? I said, yeah, here's my tape. He played the first 35 seconds and he pulled the tape out and threw it in the trash can. He goes, it's not very good. And I went, oh, jeez, this is just like from one of those movies. The whole time I'm watching the movie, ticking over. All right, and he walked me down to a couch and he said, sit on this couch. And I sat there for like 45 minutes and no one talked to me. A couple of interns talked to me, which were nice. And then he said, come with me. And I go into the studio and there's people bustling. There's probably 6 people bustling around this small studio, which I now know is a radio studio. He said, sit there, put on the headphones. I've never been in a radio studio before in my life. I put the headphones on, and then I see the on-air light go on. I'm like, geez, I couldn't possibly be putting a stranger on the radio. I've just walked in off the street, and I hear the famous NBC Olympic music in the background, this beautiful orchestra playing, and I'm like, oh, that sounds good. And then I hear a voice go, we've been scanning the universe for our Sydney Olympics correspondent, and we're about to do a job interview right here. And in my head, first thought I have is, that's my fucking idea. He's just stolen my idea and put it straight on the radio, and which is the beauty of radio, people. And it was these 2 guys, Scott and Todd, on a station called WPLJ, and they start doing an on-air job interview of asking me why I'd be good at being their Sydney Olympics correspondent, and no pressure, mate. And I'm just. It was probably the easiest I've ever been on air because I was like loose and I was a real smart ass that morning. I'm like, and they at the end of the 10 minutes of them interviewing me, they go, do you have any experience in broadcasting? I went, no. They said, any experience in TV at all? No. Any experience in radio? No. And they looked at each other and said, perfect, you're hired. You're our Sydney Olympics correspondent. And I walk out of the studio, I said, what the fuck just happened then? And it's one of those moments where I kind of saw my life pass, moment where I was just sort of looking down on it going, something's just happened here, and walked out and got on the plane, went back to Australia, and they paid me $50 a phone call, and I called in every single day to this morning show, which turned out to be one of the biggest morning shows in America. Based in New York City, goes to New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island. They had about 2.5 million listeners every morning. And it was a big women's male, so split evenly. Kind of like I always say to Brits, it's kind of like a Chris Tarrant show. Like that. Remember Chris Tarrant when he was, and the two hosts were like middle-aged men, very funny guys, straight man and a funny guy, and the Scott and Todd show, and they were great. And anyway, called in, and that's when I became this guy called Brad Blanks, and I wasn't talking sport. Everything was all my fuck ups from the Olympics, trying to get interviews with famous people and failing, and and we just had great running gags, and the Sydney Olympics were awesome, and I was on the piss every night, and I'd drink a 6-pack of beers pretty much before I'd get on the air with them, which was wild, and I'd never do that now, but and it was just an exhilarating feeling. And then it took me a year from that moment for them to hire me, so I was pitching them ideas for the next year, and eventually they brought me over in October 2001, and I was on that show for another 9 years, which is crazy.